"You're coming with me," said the lonely rancher to the woman beaten for giving birth to 3 girls. The silence came first, then the dust. Martha Hayes sat in the dirt beside her broken door, watching red drops fall from her split lip onto the dry earth below. Each drop disappeared quick as it came, swallowed up by ground that knew thirst better than mercy. The taste of blood mixed with tears on her tongue, but she had no more crying left. 3 days had emptied her of everything. Her husband's voice still rang in her ears. 3 girls, he had screamed, his fist finding her face again and again. 3 worthless girls who couldn't even live a full day. His boots had kicked up dust as he stormed away, leaving her with the echo of his rage and the weight of her failures. The cabin behind her stood broken too, windows cracked like spider webs, the door hanging crooked on its leather hinges. Inside, overturned chairs and scattered dishes told the story of Henry's fury. But Martha couldn't look at the mess. Her eyes stayed fixed on the hill that rose behind their home, where 3 small crosses marked the ground where her daughters slept. She had dug those graves herself. Henry wouldn't touch them. Cursed, he had called them, born from a cursed woman. So Martha had taken the shovel with hands still bleeding from childbirth and carved out 3 shallow beds in the hard earth. The work had taken her most of the night, but she didn't mind. Her girls deserved better than the buzzards. Baby Sarah had lived 2 hours, little enough to draw breath, open her eyes once, and look at Martha like she was trying to say something important. Martha had held her close, whispering all the love songs her own mother had sung. When the fever took Sarah, she went quiet, like she was just falling asleep. Baby Ruth came next. She lived half a day, long enough for Martha to see she had Henry's stubborn chin and her own green eyes. Ruth had tried to nurse, her little mouth working hard against Martha's breast. But the sickness was in her too, burning her small body like a fire that couldn't be put out. Baby Hope lived the longest. 3 days she fought, crying weak as a kitten, her tiny fists reaching for something Martha couldn't give. Hope's eyes never opened, but she would turn her head when Martha spoke, like she knew her mama's voice. On the 3rd night, when the fever finally won, Martha had sung her to sleep with a lullaby that broke her heart to finish. Now the crosses stood crooked in the wind, made from scrap wood and bound with strips torn from Martha's own dress. No preacher had come to say words over them. No neighbors had brought food or flowers. Just Martha, alone with her grief and the terrible quiet that followed death. The sun climbed higher, baking the blood on her face until it pulled tight like a mask. Her ribs ached where Henry's boots had found them. Her right eye had swollen shut, turning the world into something seen through a keyhole. But the pain in her body was nothing next to the hollow place in her chest where her daughters should have been. She thought about following them. The old well behind the cabin ran deep and dark. The rope that lowered the bucket could hold other things too. For 3 days she had thought about it, sitting by their graves, wondering if love was reason enough to die. But something held her back. Maybe it was the way Hope had fought so hard to stay. Maybe it was the fear that death might not reunite them at all. The sound of hooves broke through her thinking. Martha lifted her head, squinting through her good eye at the rider coming up the long path to their cabin. She didn't recognize the horse, a big bay mare with white on her feet. The man in the saddle sat straight and easy, like someone used to long rides under hard sun. Samuel Creek had been riding fence when he saw the smoke. Or rather, the lack of it. For 3 days running, no smoke had risen from the Hayes cabin chimney. In country where fire meant life, that kind of silence usually meant trouble. He had met Henry Hayes only twice. Once at the general store in town, where the man had complained loud and long about the price of everything. Once at a cattle drive, where Henry had tried to sell sick horses and acted surprised when nobody wanted them. Samuel hadn't liked him either time. There was a mean edge to Henry Hayes, the kind that came out when he thought nobody important was watching. But Samuel had never seen Martha Hayes up close. Only glimpses of her hanging laundry or working in her small garden. From a distance, she looked like a woman who knew how to make things grow in hard ground. The kind of woman who would wave if she saw you pass, even if she didn't know your name. Now, Seeing her broken in the dirt, Samuel felt something twist in his chest. He had seen beaten animals before, horses whipped until they lost the light in their eyes. But this was different. This was a woman who had been beaten for bringing life into the world, and that seemed like the worst kind of cruelty. Samuel climbed down from his mare slow and careful, keeping his hands where Martha could see them. Her one good eye followed his movements, alert as a cornered animal. Blood had dried in dark streaks down her face. Her dress was torn and stained. But it was her stillness that worried him most. The way she sat so quiet, like all the fight had been beaten out of her. "Ma'am," he said, taking off his hat. His voice came out rough from disuse. Samuel lived alone and sometimes went days without speaking to another soul. "I'm Samuel Creek. I got a ranch about 5 miles east of here." Martha nodded, but didn't speak. Her lips looked too swollen for easy words. Samuel knelt down in the dust beside her, close enough to help, but far enough to not crowd her. Up close, he could see the purple bruises spreading across her throat. Finger marks, he realized with growing anger. Someone had tried to choke the life out of her. "Where's your husband?" Samuel asked, though he was starting to guess the answer. "Gone," Martha whispered. The word came out cracked and dry. Said he was done with cursed women and dead babies. Samuel's jaw tightened. He looked past Martha to the hill behind the cabin, where 3 small crosses caught the morning light. Understanding hit him like a punch to the gut. This woman hadn't just been beaten. She had lost children and been blamed for it. How long since they? Samuel couldn't finish the question. 3 days. Martha's good, I fixed on the crosses. Fever took them quick. One after the other, like falling dominoes. Samuel had lost people too. His wife, Anna, 7 years back, to the same kind of fever that swept through settlements like wildfire. Their unborn child had died with her, buried in the same grave on the hill behind his ranch. He knew the weight of that kind of loss, the way it could crush a person's spirit until nothing was left but the need to keep breathing. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. The words felt small against such a big hurt, but they were all he had. Martha looked at him, then really looked like she was trying to decide if he was real or just another desert mirage. Most men would have ridden past, not wanting to get mixed up in another man's business. But Samuel Creek had stopped. He had knelt in the dust beside her like her pain mattered. "Why are you here?" she asked. Samuel studied her face, seeing past the bruises to the woman underneath. There was strength there, buried under the hurt, but not broken. The same kind of strength it took to dig graves with bleeding hands and sit vigil over crosses in the wind. "Saw no smoke from your chimney," he said. "Figured somebody might need help." Martha almost smiled at that. "Almost. Henry wouldn't like you being here." "Henry ain't here," Samuel said quiet. "You are." The wind picked up, rattling the loose boards on the cabin and stirring dust devils in the empty yard. Martha shivered despite the heat. She had been sitting in the same spot for so long that her body had forgotten how to move. Samuel saw her shaking and made a decision that would change both their lives. He stood up slow, brushing dust from his knees, and looked down at the woman who had loved 3 daughters enough to grieve them proper, even while her own world fell apart. "You're coming with me," he said, and his voice carried the certainty of a man who had made up his mind about something important. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and the promise of something different than the life that had broken her. Martha didn't speak for the first mile. She sat sideways on Samuel's mare, her torn dress tucked careful around her legs, one hand gripping the saddle horn like it was the only thing keeping her from falling back into the nightmare she had left behind. Samuel walked beside the horse, leading them away from the broken cabin and the 3 small crosses on the hill. The sun climbed higher as they traveled, burning off the morning cool and painting the desert in shades of gold and red. Martha's swollen eye had opened enough to see the world in slices. Cactus flowers blooming purple despite the heat, lizards darting between rocks, the endless sky that stretched from horizon to horizon like God's own blue blanket. "How far?" she asked when the silence grew too heavy. 5 miles, Samuel said, not looking back. "Maybe 6. Depends on how the creek runs." Martha nodded, and fell quiet again. 5 miles. In her old life, 5 miles would have been nothing. A short ride to town or to visit neighbors. But now it felt like crossing into another country, leaving behind everything she had known for something she couldn't even imagine. The path wound through red rock canyons where the walls rose high enough to block the sun and create pools of blessed shade. Here, Samuel stopped to let the mare drink from a thin stream that trickled between the stones. Martha slipped down from the saddle on unsteady legs, her body still aching from Henry's fists and boots. She knelt beside the water and cupped it in her hands, washing the dried blood from her face with gentle touches. The cold felt like mercy against her bruised skin. In the clear water, she caught sight of her reflection, a stranger with purple bruises and split lips, eyes that had seen too much sorrow. "There's soap in my saddlebags," Samuel said, quiet, "and a clean cloth." Martha looked up at him, surprised by the kindness. Henry had never offered such things. If she wanted to wash, she had to find her own way to do it. But Samuel was already digging through his bags, pulling out a small bar of lye soap wrapped in brown paper and a cloth that smelled like sunshine. "Thank you," she whispered, taking the gifts like they were made of gold. Samuel turned his back to give her privacy while she washed. The soap stung her cuts, but cleaned away 3 days of dried tears and blood. When she was done, her face felt raw but human again. The cloth she kept pressed against her swollen lip where it still leaked red. They rode on through the afternoon, the mare's hooves keeping time against the hard-packed earth. Samuel walked in the shade beside them, his hat tilted low against the sun, saying nothing but always watching the path ahead for dangers Martha couldn't see. As the miles passed, Martha began to notice things. The way Samuel moved easy in the saddle when he climbed up to ride beside her. How he knew the name of every canyon and creek they crossed. The gentle way he spoke to his mare, calling her Daisy and stroking her neck when she grew restless. "You've lived here long?" Martha asked when the silence stretched thin. 7 years, Samuel said. "Came out from Kansas after." He stopped, like some words were too heavy to carry. Martha waited, but he didn't finish the thought. She understood. Some stories hurt too much to tell to strangers, even kind ones who offered soap and clean cloths. The sun was painting the western sky in shades of orange and pink when Samuel's ranch finally came into view. Martha's breath caught in her throat at the sight of it. The house sat small and neat in a valley between rolling hills, with a barn and corrals that looked well-tended and strong. Cattle dotted the pastures like brown and white flowers, and a vegetable garden grew green and wild behind a wooden fence. But it was the hill behind the house that made Martha's chest tighten. A single grave sat under a cottonwood tree, marked with a wooden cross that had weathered gray from years of wind and rain. Samuel's eyes followed hers to the hill, and his jaw worked like he was chewing words he couldn't swallow. "Anna," he said finally, "my wife, and our baby." Martha nodded, understanding passing between them without need for more words. Loss knew loss, recognized it like an old friend in the eyes of another broken soul. The cattle wandered over as they approached the corral, curious about the strangers. Martha slipped down from the mare and walked to the fence, her movements still careful but gaining strength. A red cow with white patches pushed her nose through the rails, snuffling at Martha's outstretched hand. "Hey there, pretty girl," Martha said soft, and her voice carried something it hadn't held in days, warmth. The cow's eyes were brown and patient, reminding Martha of the gentle milk cow she had tended as a child. Without thinking, she began to hum an old song her mother had taught her, something about green fields and peaceful waters. Samuel watched from where he was unsaddling Daisy, his hands working the leather straps, but his attention fixed on the woman by his fence. Martha hummed like it was the most natural thing in the world, and the cattle gathered around her like she was calling them home. Her bruised face had softened, and for the first time since he found her in the dirt, she looked less like a broken thing and more like a person remembering how to live. The sound of hooves on the path made them both turn. 3 riders approached from the east, neighbors Samuel recognized but hadn't expected. Jake Morrison rode in front, his weathered face set hard with disapproval. Behind him came Tom Bradley and young Pete Nash, both men Samuel had counted as friends until this moment. "Samuel," Jake called out, not bothering with greetings. His eyes fixed on Martha like she was something dangerous. "Heard you picked up Henry Hayes' woman." Samuel stepped away from his horse, his body moving to put himself between Martha and the riders. "She's got a name," he said quiet. "Martha. Don't matter what she's called," Jake said, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. "Point is, she's another man's wife. Married proper in the eyes of God and law. Henry Hayes left her to die," Samuel said, his voice carrying a warning. "Beat her near senseless and rode off. That changes things." Tom Bradley shook his head like Samuel was a child who didn't understand simple truths. "Marriage is marriage, Samuel. Can't just take a man's woman because he had words with her." Martha felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from shame, but from anger she hadn't known still lived inside her. "Had words," she repeated, stepping out from behind Samuel. "Is that what you call this?" She turned her face so they could see the purple bruises, the split lip, the eye that still wouldn't open all the way. Pete Nash, barely 20 and still learning how to be hard like the older men, shifted uncomfortable in his saddle. But Jake Morrison's expression didn't change. "Ain't our business what happens between a man and his wife," Jake said. "But harboring another man's woman, that's everybody's business." Samuel's hand moved to rest on the gun at his hip, not threatening, but ready. "She's under my protection now. That makes it my business." The three riders exchanged looks, and Martha could feel the weight of their judgment settling over the ranch like storm clouds. In their eyes, she wasn't a woman who had lost 3 babies and nearly her life. She was property that belonged somewhere else, causing trouble just by breathing. But Samuel stood steady beside her, his presence like a wall against their disapproval. And Martha realized something had changed during their long ride through the canyons. The hollow place in her chest, where her daughter's absence lived like a wound, felt different now. Not healed. That would take time she couldn't count, but no longer bleeding quite so fierce. Jake Morrison gathered his reins, preparing to leave. "You're making a mistake, Samuel. This woman's got death following her like a shadow. Mark my words, no good will come of this." As the riders disappeared into the gathering dusk, Martha looked out at the horizon where the last light painted the mountains purple and gold. For the first time in days, she let herself think about tomorrow and the day after that, and all the days that might stretch ahead like an unwritten story. The fear was still there, and the grief that would probably never fully leave. But underneath it all, something small and stubborn had begun to grow, something that felt almost like hope. The first snow came early that year, falling soft and silent in October when the leaves should have been turning gold. Martha stood at the kitchen window, watching white flakes drift past the glass like tiny prayers, and pressed her hand to the small curve of her belly where new life grew. For months had passed since Samuel brought her to the ranch. For months of learning how to sleep without fear, how to speak without weighing every word for danger, how to let her body heal from the inside out. The bruises had faded to nothing, but the baby growing beneath her heart was proof that some things from her old life would follow her forever. Samuel came in from the barn, stamping snow from his boots and shaking it from his coat. His hair had grown longer through the summer months, and Martha had taken to cutting it for him by lamplight, her fingers gentle as she worked the scissors around his ears. These small intimacies had grown between them like wildflowers, unplanned but somehow necessary. "Storm's coming in hard," Samuel said, hanging his coat on the peg by the door. "Could be snowed in for days." Martha nodded, still watching the snow fall thick and heavy beyond the window. The cattle were safe in the barn, the firewood was stacked high against the house, and the root cellar held enough food to last them through the worst of winter. Samuel was the kind of man who planned for troubles before they arrived. "Baby's moving," Martha said quiet, not turning from the window. Samuel crossed the small kitchen and stood behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body but not touching. These past months, he had been careful never to touch her without permission, never to crowd her in ways that might bring back memories of Henry's hands. But Martha found herself wanting to lean back against his chest, to feel solid and safe against the storm building outside. "Boy or girl, you think?" Samuel asked, his voice soft as the snow falling past the glass. Martha smiled, the first real smile he had seen from her since that day he found her in the dust. "Girl," she said with certainty. "She kicks like she's already fighting the world." They stood together in the quiet kitchen, watching winter settle over the valley like a white blanket. The baby turned and stretched inside Martha's belly, and she caught Samuel's hand without thinking, pressing it to where their child moved beneath her ribs. Samuel went still at her touch, his breath catching. Through the thin fabric of her dress, he could feel the tiny life that had grown between them. Not his blood, but his to protect just the same. The baby pushed back against his palm like she was introducing herself. "Hello there, little fighter," Samuel whispered, and Martha's heart did something it hadn't done since she lost her 3 daughters. It opened just a little to the possibility of loving again without losing everything. The storm lasted 3 days. Snow piled against the windows and blocked the doors, turning the ranch house into a warm island in a white sea. Samuel kept the fires burning while Martha cooked and mended clothes and hummed songs that made the small rooms feel like home. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, Martha working on tiny clothes for the baby while Samuel read aloud from the few books he owned. On the 3rd night, as the wind howled around the house like something wild and hungry, Martha felt the first sharp pain low in her back. She set down her sewing and breathed slow and careful, counting the seconds until the pain passed. "Too early," she whispered to herself, one hand pressed to her belly. The baby wasn't due for another 3 months. Fear crept up her throat like ice water. Samuel looked up from his book, seeing the worry in her face. "Martha." "I'm all right," she said, but another pain grabbed her middle and made her gasp. This time, Samuel was beside her before the pain faded, his hands steady on her shoulders. "What can I do?" he asked. "Just stay close," Martha said, and he did, holding her hand through the pains that came and went like ocean waves. But as the night wore on, the pains faded and the baby settled quiet in her womb. False alarm, Martha told herself, but the fear stayed with her like a shadow. Morning brought clear skies and the sound of something that made Samuel's blood run cold. Hoofbeats in the snow, coming up the path to the house. He moved to the window and peered through the frost, his heart sinking at what he saw. Henry Hayes sat on a tired horse, thinner than Samuel remembered, but meaner looking, his face hard with anger and purpose. Behind him rode 2 other men Samuel didn't recognize, rough-looking types with guns on their hips and trouble in their eyes. "Martha," Samuel said quiet, not turning from the window. "Get to the back room. Lock the door." Martha struggled to her feet, one hand supporting her belly. It's Henry," Samuel said, and her face went white as the snow outside. Samuel watched his wife move slow and careful toward the bedroom, her body heavy with child but her spirit already preparing to fight or run. The sight of her retreat lit something fierce in his chest. Not anger, exactly, but a cold determination that surprised him with its strength. Henry's voice carried across the snow-covered yard, loud and full of ownership. "Samuel Creek, I know you got my wife in there. Send her out, and we can settle this peaceful." Samuel opened the front door slow, his rifle in his hands, but not yet raised. The cold air hit him like a slap, but he didn't step back. "She's not your wife anymore, Henry. You gave up that right when you left her to die." Henry laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Law says different. Marriage is marriage, no matter what pretty words you tell yourself." "Law also says a man can't beat his wife near to death," Samuel replied. "Seems like you forgot that part." One of the men with Henry shifted in his saddle, his hand moving to his gun. Samuel recognized the type, hired muscle that would kill for the right price. Henry had come prepared for violence. "She's carrying my child," Henry called out. "That baby belongs to me, same as she does." Through the bedroom window, Martha heard every word. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, like she was trying to fight her way free of the danger surrounding them. Martha pressed both hands to her belly and whispered, "Not his, little one. Never his." Samuel stepped further onto the porch, his rifle still low but ready. "The way I see it, Henry, you rode away from your responsibilities. Martha's under my protection now, and so is her child. You got no claim here." Henry's face darkened with rage. "That's my baby she's carrying. My blood. And I aim to take back what's mine. Over my dead body," Samuel said, and he meant every word. The two hired guns moved their horses to flank the house, cutting off escape routes. Henry smiled, showing teeth gone yellow from tobacco and neglect. "That could be arranged, Creek. One way or another. I'm leaving here with my wife and child." Inside the house, Martha heard the deadly quiet that settled over men about to kill each other. Her baby girl kicked again, hard enough to make Martha gasp, and suddenly she understood what the child was trying to tell her. This little fighter wasn't going to wait for spring to arrive. The fear and stress had started something that wouldn't be stopped. Samuel saw Martha appear in the doorway behind him, her face pale but determined. "Samuel," she said quiet, "the baby's coming." Now, the wind picked up, swirling snow between the men like a curtain, and Samuel realized that everything he had built, everything he had come to love, hung in the balance of the next few minutes. The storm in his heart matched the one beginning to rage outside, and he raised his rifle with hands that no longer trembled. Fell first, not from Samuel's bullet, but from the bottle of whiskey he had been drinking for courage all morning. His horse shied at the sudden noise, and Henry tumbled into the snow, cursing and scrambling for the gun that had fallen from his numb fingers. Samuel's shot had gone wide on purpose, a warning, not a killing blow. But the two hired men didn't know that. They wheeled their horses and rode hard for the canyon, leaving Henry alone in the snow with his broken dreams of revenge. Inside the house, Martha's cries joined the wind as her daughter fought to be born 3 months too soon. Samuel glanced back through the open door, torn between the threat outside and the woman who needed him more than his own breathing. "Go," Martha gasped between pains. I can do this." But Samuel had already made his choice. He set the rifle against the door frame and knelt beside the bed where Martha gripped the quilts like they were anchors in a storm. Her face was white with pain, but her eyes held the same fierce determination he had seen that first day when she sat beside her daughter's graves. "Too early," Martha whispered, tears mixing with sweat on her cheeks. "She's too small." "She's yours," Samuel said, taking her hand. "She'll fight." Outside, Henry Hayes struggled to his feet and staggered toward his fallen horse. The cold was already working through his thin coat, and his hands shook too bad to hold the reins steady. The whiskey that had given him courage was now stealing his strength, and the smart part of his mind knew he had to leave or die in the snow. But pride made him stupid. Pride and the burn of losing face in front of other men. Henry pulled himself onto his horse and rode it close to the house, shouting threats that the wind stole away. Inside, neither Samuel nor Martha heard him. They were too busy bringing life into the world. The baby came fast and small, no bigger than a kitten, with skin so pale it was almost see-through. But her lungs were strong, and her cry filled the small room like music after too much silence. Samuel caught her in clean towels while Martha sobbed with relief and joy and exhaustion all mixed together. "A girl," Samuel said, his voice rough with wonder. "Just like you said." Martha reached for her daughter with shaking hands, and Samuel placed the tiny child on her chest. The baby was small enough to hold in one palm, but she moved with purpose, her little fists reaching for her mother's voice. "Hello, Hope," Martha whispered, choosing the same name she had given to her last daughter. "Hello, my brave girl." Samuel covered them both with quilts and built up the fire while Martha tried to nurse the baby who was almost too small to latch. Hope struggled and fussed, but she was trying, and that was enough to make Samuel believe in miracles. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. Henry Hayes sat on his horse in the sudden quiet, looking at the warm light spilling from the windows of Samuel's house. He could hear voices inside, low and gentle and full of wonder at new life. The sound made something twist in his chest, something that might have been regret if he had been a different kind of man. But Henry Hayes was not given to second thoughts. He kicked his horse and rode away into the gathering dark, leaving tracks in the snow that would be gone by morning. 3 days passed before Samuel dared to believe the baby would live. Hope was so small that she fit in his cupped hands, but she grew stronger each day, nursing better and crying louder and gripping his finger with a strength that surprised them both. Martha healed slower. The early birth had taken more from her body than she wanted to admit, and for a week she could barely sit up without feeling faint. But Samuel tended her with the same gentle care he showed his injured cattle, bringing her food and changing Hope's small clothes and never complaining about the sleepless nights. "Why?" Martha asked him one evening as they sat by the fire, Hope sleeping peaceful in her arms. "Why did you help us?" Samuel was quiet for a long time, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. When he finally spoke, his words came slow and careful, like he was picking them from a pile of stones. "Lost my wife and baby 7 years back," he said. "Fever took them both in a single night. I buried them under that cottonwood tree, and I thought I was done with loving anything that could be taken away." Martha waited for him to continue, knowing there was more. "But then I found you," Samuel said, looking at her across the small room, "broken and bleeding and still fighting for what mattered to you. And I remembered what it felt like to care about something more than my own empty days. I brought you nothing but trouble," Martha said, but Samuel shook his head. "You brought me back to life," he said simple. "Both of you did." Winter passed slow and careful, with Hope growing stronger each day, and Martha learning to trust that this time, love might not end in loss. Samuel proved himself steady as the mountains, never raising his voice, never lifting his hand in anger, never making promises he couldn't keep. When spring finally came, it arrived with a rush of green that covered the valley like Hope made visible. Hope was walking by then, toddling around the small house on legs that were sturdier than they looked. She had Martha's green eyes and Samuel's stubborn chin, and she laughed at everything like the world was full of wonderful surprises. Samuel built a small garden behind the house, and Martha planted vegetables and flowers in neat rows that would feed them through another winter. But it was the wildflowers that bloomed without planting that made her heart sing, bright patches of color that pushed up through soil that had seemed too hard and dry to grow anything beautiful. One morning in late spring, Martha found Samuel teaching Hope to walk among those wildflowers, his big hands gentle as he guided her small steps through the grass. The baby, no longer tiny but still precious, babbled nonsense words that sounded like songs to Martha's ears. "Mama," Hope called when she saw Martha watching from the porch, and she broke free from Samuel's hands to run on unsteady legs toward home. Martha caught her daughter and spun her around, both of them laughing in the morning sun. When she looked up, Samuel was walking toward them through the flowers, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Martha felt complete. That afternoon, they walked together to the hill behind the house where Anna Creek rested under the cottonwood tree. Martha carried wildflowers picked from their garden, and she laid them gentle on the grave, while Samuel stood quiet beside her. "Thank you," Martha said to the woman who slept beneath the stone, "for taking such good care of him until I could get here." Samuel's eyes filled with tears he had been holding back for 7 years. Martha took his hand and held it tight while Hope played in the grass at their feet, chasing butterflies that danced like tiny prayers in the warm air. Later, as the sun set behind the mountains and painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, Samuel asked Martha the question he had been carrying in his heart all winter. "Will you marry me?" he said, simple as asking for water when thirsty. Martha looked at him, this quiet man who had saved her life and taught her how to hope again, and nodded. "Yes," she said, and the word felt like freedom. They were married by the traveling preacher the next month, with Hope as their witness and the wildflowers as their church. Samuel gave Martha a ring made from silver he had melted down from a belt buckle that had belonged to his father. Martha wore a dress she had sewn herself from blue fabric that matched the summer sky. Years passed, and more children came. 2 boys who had Samuel's patience and Martha's fierce love, and another daughter who looked so much like Hope that people often mistook them for twins. The ranch grew prosperous, and the little house expanded to hold their growing family. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, Martha would stand on the porch and look toward the east, wondering what had become of Henry Hayes. She had heard rumors over the years that he had died in a saloon fight in Denver, or that he had headed north to Montana and disappeared into the mountains. She never learned the truth and found that she no longer cared to. The past could not be changed, but it could be forgiven. And forgiveness, Martha learned, was not about forgetting the hurt or pretending it never happened. It was about choosing not to let old wounds poison new growth. On Hope's 5th birthday, Samuel carved her a small wooden horse that she could ride around the yard. Martha made a cake from wild honey and fresh eggs, and they celebrated under the cottonwood tree where wildflowers bloomed in Anna's memory. As the sun set and the children ran through the tall grass chasing fireflies, Martha sat beside Samuel on the porch and watched their world bloom around them. The 3 small crosses that had once marked her greatest sorrow were still there on the hill, but now they were surrounded by so much life and love that grief had transformed into something gentler, a sweet sadness that reminded her to treasure what she had been given. "No regrets?" Samuel asked, taking her hand in the gathering twilight. Martha looked at their children playing in the yard, at the home they had built together from broken pieces, at the man who had seen her at her worst and loved her anyway. Morning had broken the silence that once filled her heart, and in its place had grown something stronger than sorrow, deeper than loss. "No regrets," Martha said, and meant it with every breath in her body. Only gratitude for second chances and the courage to take them.